So Bowser then spent $5 million refurbishing it, making it more pedestrian friendly. And when she was done with that, she called it a permanent monument in D.C. And then she even heavily advertised it on the D.C. website. Republicans have never liked it. They believe it should just be 16th Street again.
Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Bedford, and I'm here with commentary editor Conn Carroll. Conn, it's just a few short years, and already we're seeing the city of Washington, D.C., where we are right now, backtrack on the designation of this strip of road right outside the White House as Black Lives Matter Plaza. What is the fate of BLM Plaza?
So the name BLM Plaza is still probably going to be in effect. That we don't know. But Mayor Bowser did announce yesterday that the mural, the big Black Lives Matter block print, yellow on the black background, she announced yesterday that is going to be no more. Instead, they're going to have another mural created by students and artists within the area. But that might not be enough to satisfy Republicans. So, as you may know, back in June of 2020, during the George Floyd Summer of Love, there was a demonstration outside the White House that turned violent. The police then used pepper spray to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. So about a couple days later, in the middle of the night, Mayor Bowser comes in and has people completely paint the street black and then have Black Lives Matter in yellow script on the street. And she then renamed it Black Lives Matter Plaza. Nobody liked it. Mm-hmm. Republicans were outraged. But even the Black Lives Matter movement itself called it a distraction from real policy reforms. And so then they came in the next night and scrolled in defund the police on the same area. So Bowser then spent $5 million refurbishing it, making it more pedestrian friendly. And when she was done with that, she called it a permanent monument in D.C. And then she even heavily advertised it on the D.C. website. Republicans have never liked it. They believe it should just be 16th Street again. Although the legislation that Representative Andrew Clyde from Georgia has introduced would not only get rid of the Black Lives Matter mural, but rename it, instead of Black Lives Matter Plaza, he wants to name it Liberty Plaza, which seems kind of just rubbing salt in the wound. I think 16th Street is fine. Just give it its old name back.
So two things in there. One, it seems like, I guess, Mayor Bowser considers that legislation a real threat to D.C., the local control of mm-hmm. D.C. But also, what do you think it says about the broader cultural moment that a Democrat is coming out and saying, let's paint over BLM to very little friction from either side?
Right. Well, they're definitely connected
mm-hmm.
in the sense that, yes, she definitely feels like she has some space to take it back, but she's definitely facing pressure from the Trump administration, who issued an executive order on day one saying that they're going to exert more control over D.C. in the sense of prosecuting crime more, inflicting more penalties on those who are convicted of crimes, and cracking down on homelessness. Now, right before she announced the mural getting rid of, Trump rescinded that executive order. So she's clearly negotiating with Trump and with Republicans in Congress on just how much she can keep. So it seems that instead of being like a permanent monument, Black Lives Matter Plaza is clearly just like an expendable pawn in her game with Republicans.
Switching gears a little bit, the Supreme Court this week issued a ruling in San Francisco, a sewage case, that could potentially have broader implications for the power of the EPA, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So here you have the city of San Francisco, which normally loves the EPA. In fact, the city council actually voted 8-2 to direct the city to try and find a settlement with the EPA before it went to court. But ultimately what happens here is San Francisco had a Clean Water Act permit to operate their city sewage system mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
For a number of years, and specific one plant, the Oceanside plant, which serves about 250,000 residents. It was up for renewal in 2019, and the EPA added these two new provisions that basically under the Clean Water Act, the EPA will come in and say, look, if you do X, Y, and Z, if you check these boxes and do these best practices in the industry, then we will hold you harmless from suits against you by us, from enforcement against you by us, if, for whatever reason, there ends up being some pollutants, discharges into the water. So what happens in San Francisco, as in many cities, when there's most of the time, 99% of the time, everything's fine. But sometimes when there's a lot of rain, the stormwater system overflows with the regular sewage system, and you do get some leakage, in this case, into the Pacific Ocean. So San Francisco realized that in order to make the changes necessary to make sure that no sewage ever leaks in the Pacific Ocean, it would cost $10 billion. They didn't have $10 billion. So that's why they sued the EPA and say, look, we're fine with you coming in and saying, you know, you have to do X, Y, Z to get your permit. But for you to come back and say, oh, I know you complied with our permit, but we're going to fine you anyways, we think that's unreasonable. And ultimately, the Supreme Court agreed. It says, look, the Clean Water Act as a whole created this system that allowed entities to come in and say, okay, EPA, we want to comply, we want to get right with the law, what specifically we have to do. And then once EPA tells them what they have to do to be compliant, then they can't come back and get them anyways. So the San Francisco was on the same side, well, not on the same side. They were, the people filed amicus briefs on their side, including the National Home Builders Association, National Miners Association, the American Farm Bureau. So basically everyone that deals with EPA permitting definitely did not want to have the precedent out there that the EPA could not only force you to get permits all the time, force you to do everything in the permits, but then even after you complied with a permit, to come in and say, we're still going to fine you anyways.
Well, zooming out even more, this is not the first case that this current Supreme Court has had that sort of looks at executive authority and like the administrative state. And there are a bunch of cases making their way through the lower courts that have big implications for whether Donald Trump can rein in some of these bureaucracies. Do you think this case or any others are indicative that this is a court that might be sympathetic to the Trump effort to pull back on bureaucracy power?
I would really put this outside of the context of Trump and put this in a larger conservative effort to rein in executive agencies. Remember last term we had the big Chevron case.
Right.
Under Chevron, this case probably would have decided differently. The Supreme Court probably would have just said, oh, look, there's some statutory ambiguity here. We're not going to investigate at all.
If the EPA says it, that
if
must
the
be.
EPA says it, the EPA says it, that's fine. And that's not what happened here. Instead, the court said, look, what is the purpose of the statute? What was Congress trying to accomplish? And they said, this interpretation by EPA, which is new, by the way, is in violation of what the statute is trying to accomplish. So we're going to come and say that the agency is wrong. So I would say that this is really much part of an earlier movement to kind of allow courts to rein in agency power.
Pre-Trump effort.
Pre-Trump effort.
Well, Conn, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
You can get more writing from Conn and the rest of the commentary team at washingtonexaminer.com.